Hey you guys, sorry I had made a video previous, but the YouTube thing like cut out on me. Anyway, so I did my first site visit. It was at Good Samaritan, Good Sam's, and it's in between Northern Colorado and Metro Denver. It is off of the way I went, it was off of a exit ramp. It's a really nice facility. It shares, I don't say it shares the campus because it doesn't share the building, but it shares that area with Kaiser Permanente, and some apartment complexes and a fire stations behind it. It's really random. It's nothing out there. It's pretty rural, I guess rural in that area. But it was a nice experience. It was beautiful out there because, it just snowed, so it was really nice. So this visit, I think altogether, this is my third site or fourth site, different site. And I sat with the CDI team. So those are the nurses who take care of, basically they challenge the coding against the inpatient coder. Or they say, oh, this documentation supports a more specific diagnosis code or procedure, and this is what I think, here's why. And they basically are the in-between between the doctor and the coder, and they do have more experience bedside nursing. The team lead that I worked with that day, she had over 16 years of bedside nursing. I think she said in med surg or something like that, I think. And she had now 8 years of concurrent work history in CDI, clinical documentation. So basically, so when I got there, she introduced me to her team, and they work, I think, 3 days in the facility and 2 days at home. The director or the manager of the group was not there that day. She was off for something, or she was handling some kind of issue that had arose at another facility, something. And I met one of the new nurses that they had just hired. This was her first week, so she's doing a lot of, like just housekeeping stuff. Then I also met people from the utilization review team and social workers. So the utilization review team makes sure that whatever the patient comes into the facility for is medically necessary. They also assist with placement. If they have a hard to place patient, like either they don't have good insurance or have no insurance, their acuity level is really high and no one wants to take that risk to take them on as a patient, or they are an aggressive patient. If they're an aggressive patient, usually it's really hard to place them. Also, the social workers were in there, and the social workers, I don't think she told me that they had their bachelor's degree or a master's degree in social work. They didn't necessarily have to have a clinical background, so they also assist with placement issues. The team is not huge. The CDI team consisted of 6 nurses in that building, and I think the whole team all together has over 50 CDI nurses. Let me see. The utilization review, I can't remember how many people on that, but I think there was only like 4 social workers. And it was pretty interesting, like seeing how they work. So just getting down to what she does. So when I first got there, and we sat down at the desk, she went over like her job function. Like she basically challenges the inpatient coding and coder on why they coded these codes, and then she goes back and she references the documentation, and she also queries the physician for a more specific charge or a more specific code based on their own documentation. Like when I got there, she was querying the physician on a right side pulmonary embolism, and she said to her, having that experience, the right side pulmonary emboli is the same as, an emboli is the same as embolism. She said, but the coder is challenging her and is just coding pulmonary embolism. And she said she understands why, because that's what the physician wrote. But she said, I think the emboli is more specific, or she needed more detail, because I think the code was pulmonary embolism unspecified, and she was trying to get a more specified code. So she had a template that they had set up, and she put in documentation that the physician, so she basically just copied and pasted from whatever the doctor had originally wrote in his notes, put that in there, and then asked them at the bottom, basically, do you agree with this diagnosis, or is there something more specific? And then she put on there something about basically the case, the charges are in review at the moment, and we want to know if this is, do you agree with your diagnosis as of now? And she said usually the doctors come back with the patient's discharge, like they don't like to change their documentation or create an amendment once the patient is gone, or an addendum or anything. And she said that they get nervous because they're afraid that the lawyers are going to come back and say, oh, well, you changed your documentation. Why did you choose to change your documentation? When you were in office with the patient, wasn't this accurate at the time? And she told me, they get scared, but there's no reason. She said, we will back them up if they need us to. But she said, I'd rather do this now when the patient's just a few days or a week out of office rather than 2 years down the line. She said no one remembers 2 years down the line about their patient, a year, 6 months, 8 months. She said that the doctors get nervous and they don't want to get sued, especially when malpractice comes up. And, malpractice can happen at any time. It can be years down the road, and the doctor's getting sued, and she said they get antsy about it. But she said she tries, and they try to have open communication between the physician, letting them know that it's okay if they change their, not change, let me say that, no, let me say that, amend their documentation or create an addendum, because you can't change the medical record once the information is in there. All you can put in there is an addendum stating that on on further review, I agree with, or I think that the patient truly had this instead of the pulmonary embolism first noted, or something like that, So she showed me her little layout and how she addresses the doctors. She sent a few, and she was showing me like how the breakdown, how they go about sorting through the accounts and what's high priority and all that stuff. So high priority is Medicare, of course, since we have a short amount of time to get the money back. And then self-pay is at the bottom because it's self-pay. Like the likelihood of them getting their money back from a self-pay patient is really low. So they're on the bottom of the row. And it was crazy because I saw a self-pay account and it was over 100 G's, like 100K. So it was pretty interesting to see how they do the hierarchy. And, then HMOs are, I think, so it was Medicare, commercial insurance, then HMOs, and then self-pay. They didn't so much go off of the high dollar, the dollar amount, but that. And then I think if they had like a deceased patient, because even for us as a coder, the deceased patient accounts are, they fall into a separate work queue because they are deceased, them, and then high dollar accounts. So usually that's just the inpatient side. I think it's kind of nice that the inpatient coders have this like extra person, the second step before the claim is submitted, to get checked over. I guess, it kind of keeps you on your toes because, I guess it can get annoying too, but it keeps you on your toes because you always have to make sure that you're on top of your game. You know what's coming down as far as changes in CPT code, procedural coding and diagnostic coding, and you have to know like what's going on and how these things apply to you. And inpatient coding is not easy. It looks like it's not easy. Me as an outpatient coder, I code clinical impressions. Like they have to state, this is what's wrong with the patient. That's it. There's nothing else. If they code possible, probably, likely, I cannot code it. But an inpatient, that's okay. You can code those things. So it's kind of vague in some terms because anything is kind of possible, and everything is based on interpretation. From what I can tell, just the coding world period, I mean, it does have firm coding guidelines, like this is what you have to do as far as sequencing. This is what you're supposed to place first. If you need to code this with this, you know what I mean? And everybody has their little rules and everything based on your facility. But then sometimes things are open to interpretation. One of the coding meetings I had, the management ones, we were going through a guideline for, I think, chronic kidney disease, and the ICD-10 guideline was so vague on how we should code that. And I think the facility has their own rule with chronic kidney disease, that we should assume a relationship between hypertension and chronic kidney disease, and if the patient has diabetes, coded with diabetes as well. And of course the stages and stuff. But it's pretty interesting. I talked to her about a lot of coding questions that I have. For example, on the outpatient side, we don't code all the time CPAP or it doesn't highlight in the CAC as a dependence on oxygen, even though it is pushing oxygen to you at night while you're asleep. And I guess they consider long-term use of oxygen 24 hours. But I would consider a life-saving oxygen at night, dependence upon oxygen. So we're kind of back and forth on that too. And she says she would code it if the patient has chronic respiratory illness. And I agree, I do capture it if they have chronic respiratory failure, or severe COPD, or any type of severe respiratory issue, but I don't capture it if they have like bronchitis or something, or if they have asthma. I guess it depends on the severity of the asthma, but if it's mild or just seasonal, I don't capture it. But we talked about those things, and then she talked to me about after she finishes in CDI, her plans. She told me that she enjoyed bedside nursing, and she really enjoyed palliative care, hospice care. And she said that's where she thinks her calling is, and she'll probably go back there once her daughter is older and more able to support her own self. So it's pretty nice. The CDI nurses they have a tight they have really close reins put on them as well, along with the inpatient coders. They are audited just like we are audited. They have quarterly reviews. They have productivity to meet. They also are coding for quality, not money, and that's being looked at as well. I mean, yeah, financial gain is something that each facility looks for, but quality now is a big initiative that's pushed. Well, it's always been an initiative that's pushed through CMS, and hospitals are benchmarked on the quality of the medical record, of the coding. So they are audited for their quality as well, and their productivity. They have to get, she said, 8 new patients a day. And she said that's pretty easy for her to do. And I know the inpatient coder has to have 6 patients an hour charts coded. I don't know how feasible that is, honestly, because I'm not an inpatient coder, and I do not know how big the charts are or how detailed they have to be. I know if a patient is in there longer, even if they're in there just for a week, even though it seems like a short stay, I mean, you don't know how many tests are ran, you don't know how many procedures are done, you don't know what findings have changed. So that's something to keep in mind. But I enjoyed being there with her and kind of getting the opposite end of seeing how coding is done. This PPE is giving me the whole experience of the revenue cycle and the ins and outs, because I had no idea what the CDI team truly did and what it takes. And I do think having the clinical background, because I hear some people say, oh, well, it's clinical documentation, they shouldn't have nurses doing it, it should be one of us. But I understand why they're in there doing it, because as a coder, especially a new coder, I'm a baby coder. I've only been in coding for like a year and 5 months. I don't know all of the disease process, so I would not know what to look for all the time or what's going to stand out. And I'm thankful that they are there and that they do, and that they are looking for more specific coding, because I want to capture as much revenue. And she also explained DRGs and severity. I know this, I'm going left. DRGs and the severity of the cases. So DRGs, the weight of the DRGs in this specific class, like even just changing, like an alcoholism, going from alcohol use to alcohol dependence, you know, create change. It didn't change the DRG necessarily, but it changed the severity of the, I guess, case. So once the DRGs go in and the coding goes in and all that stuff, there's like a little weight that comes up, and it's 1 to 4, and it tells you the likelihood of your patient, it's really morbid, passing away. And 1 is the least likely that they won't make it, and then 4 is like, yeah, they're probably gonna die. And having alcohol abuse versus alcohol dependence shot that patient's chart from a 1 to a 3 because of dependence, because the word dependence, because they were withdrawing and they were dependent upon the alcohol. And I don't know if you guys know, but withdrawing from alcohol is really difficult on the body, and they basically have to wean the alcoholics off of the drink. That patient was still prescribed alcohol while in care. Even family members that I've known that have gone into like nursing homes, and they were severe alcoholics through a good portion of their life, they are prescribed a shot or a little mini bottle each day, because they can't safely detox, especially at their age. So yeah, and I guess that's another playing part, because the patient's age and health also goes into play upon the dependence code and how likely it is that they'll come off. But and the likelihood and how they're weighted and stuff. But it was interesting getting a chance to see how DRGs work in real life, because reading it in the book at WGU just doesn't get me there all the time, and I don't really understand what it's about. So it was nice getting a chance to see it in real life. If you guys get a chance to go sit with a CDI person or even an inpatient coder, they will go over the DRG things, because that's something that has to match the DRG with the CDI team and the DRG with the inpatient coder. They have to match. The patient has to be weighted at the same. So I guess, yeah, go ahead and try and follow them if you can. I have my next site visit is coming up Wednesday, and it is in Wheat Ridge. I don't know what to expect. I've never been there, so I guess we'll see. If you guys made it this far, like, comment, subscribe, ask any questions if you have any. Thanks.